now. And now I'd like to invite Ivo Krka from Sportening to join me on the stage. Ivo will share his experience on how to empower product teams to build great products, both in large, big tech companies, but also in small businesses and startups.
Thank you.
Here you are.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here. I'm Ivo. I work with Ivan on Sportening. And after watching Sean's slides, I think we have a new goal, which is for Sportening to appear in one of the future presentations. This is obviously Sportening people clapping, but it's fine. So my second goal is I want to persuade you today that the right way to build your software products, if they're going to be great, is by having teams of independent and autonomous people, having teams that have deep understanding of the user and that they can execute and find the best solution for those users on their own. Now, I'm going to talk about this through my experience working at Google for a long time, I think 7 years. I'm also going to talk about how this works at a startup like Sportening, which has been around for half a year. And the recipe is simple. First, you need excellent people who trust the vision of what you're trying to build and the way you want to build it. Second, you need leadership that doesn't micromanage, that doesn't tell people what to do, tell them to develop A, B, or C. They just need to give them enough context and feedback so the teams know in which space they're operating and what their ultimate goal is. Third part is these excellent people need to form teams that are going to have freedom and responsibility to understand the user and to find the best solution to the problems that users are facing. And lastly, you need data. You need people on the team to look at the data, and it's not specific people on the team like a product manager or your data analyst. It needs to be everyone. This includes engineers who are actually key to successfully building great products. Now, I'm going to go over how this recipe, and I know this recipe works because I lived through it at Google. I'm living through it at Sportening. And I'm just going to describe how it worked at Google first. I'm sure most of you know that Google is always getting rewards for the best place to work, and there's a lot of stuff that they give you around the campus and so on. But the main thing about Google is they manage to hire excellent people, and they have a luxury of being very selective in their process. They're trying to get people who are problem solvers. But it's not only problem solvers and technically skilled people, they need to be able to collaborate. So in interviews, you already are looking for people who can collaborate with engineers. So engineers are interviewing you, and in an interview, you're solving some small task, but you're essentially working with the engineer who's interviewing you, and they're testing your technical skill as well as your collaboration skills. So excellent people at Google, it checks out. Now I worked at Gmail for the first 3.5 years, and once you have excellent people, again, a good way to alienate them is by telling them exactly what to do. Instead, you need to give them context of what's the big picture, what you're trying to achieve. So in this case, it was, I'm simplifying it a bit, but at the time, this was 2014, the idea was that people are using more and more smartphones, and the experience of Gmail wasn't optimized for those mobile users. You have these small screens. It's difficult to type on those screens. It's difficult to look at a lot of your emails, especially if it's long text. So the context essentially is more like a challenge where leadership tells you, okay, we need to improve mobile experience and just do your thing and let's make it happen. Now I was part of Gmail intelligence team that's tasked with a bunch of different parts in the app. But this was a 5 to 10 people team, of 5 to 10 backend engineers. who, depending on the time we're talking about, and a product manager. And this team is independently deciding what intelligence features could provide users value and how do we implement them. And this is, of course, based on a lot of data, understanding how users are using the product right now and what opportunities exist that we haven't explored yet. So just to give a bit more color to this, one of the features we were working on is Smart Reply, which is a feature that, given an incoming email, Matthew's here in the first row, he sent me an email 2 hours ago asking if we should go for dinner. And Gmail is smart enough to suggest several answers. I won't spoil and say what my answer is. I'll do it later. But so the offered answers are sure, yes, and sorry, I won't be able to make it. Now, this feature is nice, it's very useful, but the question is, how did we get to develop something like this? So it all starts with understanding how the users are behaving right now and having this domain knowledge, and then you can brainstorm about ways you can make the user's experience better. So this could be, this is one of the features, let's offer some short answers to their emails. It could be something like, oh, we need to extract maybe and summarize emails better. It could be any range of things. But you need to have everyone in the room, especially engineers at this point, because they're the ones that have the most insight into data. And one thing I didn't point out is that in this team, we didn't have any separate job role that's called data analyst, because engineers were expected to look at the data, understand the data, and be able to both collect the data and be able to interpret the data. So data analyst in that case was redundant. At that point, one of the engineers has to go in and start looking at the data and see if there's a market opportunity. So this involved looking at different metrics like how many short responses do we have on mobile devices, how many responses in general do we have on desktop versus mobile? Do people on mobile devices start writing their draft emails and then giving up? And any range of things. So you explore data and see, yes, there might be an opportunity. And at that point, you really need to ask yourself, is this feature feasible? Like, we can dream about features, but if we cannot implement them, it won't go far. So at that point, and this, like up to this point, the process is, it takes about a couple of weeks to get to this point, and then you start building a prototype. Now, this prototype wasn't some full-blown model that's performing fantastic. It wasn't deep learning model or anything like that. It was just a simple logistic regression model that's put into this prototype framework we built. And you use this model just to test whether sometimes there's, even this simple model can give you some statistical correlations that you can produce reasonable-ish answers to incoming emails. And of course, this model was working terribly 80% of the time. But for those 20%, you see that there are things like if someone is saying they're sick in the original email, then one of the suggestions would be, hope you feel better, and that's already kind of like validation that you're going in the right direction. At that point, you start building the real thing. You start iterating on the model, building more advanced things, as necessary, involving researchers who give you some cutting-edge stuff. But again, the team is responsible for iterating and deciding on the direction, as well as, again, looking at data. So data you collect at that point is quantitative from internal users, from some trusted testers externally, so you can see whether they're clicking on suggestions, whether once they click on a suggestion, they continue to write something additional. Then you can measure whether they completely discard and write their own message and so on. So you can iterate and see because you want them to use the feature, you can iterate and see what opportunities you're missing and how you can improve the feature. At this point, you also need to talk to the users. And again, real users in UX interviews where engineers will be present. And in those interviews, you find out some things that are less connected to the data and things that you quantify easily, and more connected to the psychology. One of the examples is I've shown you 3 answers on one of the previous slides. And now that, sorry, I won't be able to make it answer, it turns out that statistically, those negative answers are not very likely. So they're not very likely. People in a huge number of cases will click on the positive answer. And then our answers are generally positive. Now, that's great, but talking to users directly and understanding them what they actually want is you figure out that they don't feel comfortable with your product unless you give them the option to answer negatively. So they don't want to have a feeling that you're pushing them to answer one way or the other. They want to have options, even if that negative option is not very likely. So keep iterating, and you also find out some silly cases. For example, from the data, the model will pick up that the phrase "I love you" is a likely answer to almost any email. A relatively likely answer, probably in top 3 or top 10. But it's not a very good phrase to put if you're getting emails from your boss or from an employee to a boss. It's kind of, it can get a bit awkward. So once you keep iterating and at some point people are happy enough and start really using this feature and you're finally ready to push it to production and have real users use it, and at that point you again iterate, look at the data, develop a better model, look for suggestions, get more users to interview, and again with the team being at the center of everything and figuring out what needs to be done, what's the best thing and the best way forward. And the best way forward you keep, this part was developed years after I left the team. But one of the things that they kept looking at, and of course talking to users and figuring out what users need in addition to this, is this auto-complete suggestions. When as you type, you have auto-complete options, and it's really helpful because one of the engineers I was giving this talk to said, "This is great because my English is not very good," and then it makes me sound much better. So now, at this point, you should be asking yourself, this works at Google, this recipe of kind of how do you develop a product with this independent team works at a huge company like Google, but the question you should be asking is, does this really map to a smaller company, to a smaller environment where you're just starting with developing something? Now at Sportening, we're trying to develop a social media app where the world's sports fans would gather and be able to easily and quickly find a community of fellow-minded fans and be able to connect with each other. And our mission is to gather all the world's sports fans. And one thing that was one of the main reasons I decided to join Sportening is this challenge of how do you go from scratch, how do you build something that you believe will be used by billions of users, how do you create an organization that can do that? And I gave you the recipe, and the recipe really maps regardless of what environment we're talking about. So at Sportening, in a startup, of course, getting excellent people to join, it's a bit different than in a huge company where you have hundreds of HR people just pulling their strings and finding candidates. At a startup, you need to start with a smaller team of people you trust and you know that are good, and then those people know other great people, and then you keep expanding the team until at some point we'll need to do a more formalized process. But for now, we have a group of about 40 excellent people, so that's checked. For context, the way we're giving context is we're trying to make sure everyone at the company understands the vision. So there's a lot of text. It's kind of just a teaser. I won't force you to read it. The key point is that by documenting your vision, you can tell everyone at the company what first the market opportunity is, which is there's billions of sports fans. What the core needs you're trying to address is these sports fans want to feel a sense of belonging to their community associated to their teams. And the way we're going to do it at Sportening is by giving them a way where they can connect with fellow fans and where they can get all the information about sports they're interested in, all in one place. So you have a vision, everyone is on board with the vision. The question is, how do you kind of operationally go into action? And the way we're doing it right now is we set high-level goals. So these are company-wide goals that your teams should be working on. We have about 10 goals right now. I'm showing 3 goals that are associated to the social parts of the app. So the first goal is we want a certain number of weekly active users using social features because we're building a social app, so they better use it in a social way. The second goal has to do with having some signs of network effect, which means you need to have people invite each other into the app. And then the third goal I'm showing has to do with reaching more engagement and making sure there's enough in-app engagement by your users compared to other apps in this space. Because if it's a social app, there's going to be more engagement, and then it's kind of a bootstrap mechanism for all of those. Now, don't forget that I kind of mentioned, and I really want to stress this, I can't stress this enough. You need the leadership to be able to let go. It's not easy because it's a startup, it's your baby, but you need to be able to be challenged. So here I'm showing one of Ivan's LinkedIn posts where initially you start with some hypothesis in the app, and then it's very important for the teams at your company to question all the hypotheses that you make, because only when you test a hypothesis and you find out it wasn't right, you can change course and be able to learn new things and push the product in new directions. So this was one of my initial hypotheses around Sportening, turned out to be completely wrong. And now it's kind of, if you're talking about people with big egos, they would have a hard time accepting this, but you need humble leadership where that understands that you can have new learnings from just testing hypotheses and making sure you understand whether they're right or not, and if they're wrong, why they were wrong. So going more deeply, I'm going to show how you then map those high-level goals onto the team level. So one of the teams is the chat team, which independently is trying to figure out what the best direction for chat is. And what they do is they take those higher-level goals, so 70% of users using app in social ways, or a certain number of users arriving into the app organically. And they set some results that they believe they can deliver on. So one of the results would be we want 50% of users who join the app to join an active group in the first day of their Sportening lifetime. And for the second high-level goal, there's a key result of having people actually sharing in-app content externally to other social networks. And the teams are then independent in figuring out how they'll achieve these key results that play into the higher level goals. So in this case, you can see this graph, which is the number of users, the percentage of users joining chats in the first 24-hour period of their Sportening experience. And you can see the chart starting around 10%, and then there's a their star growth, and it keeps growing. And this is essentially the team exploring new avenues. How do you make these chat groups more discoverable? How do you make them more engaging? And how do you make them more interesting and easy to find the group of your choice? And the nice thing about organizing your organization in this way is that it scales really well. So this is just kind of a hypothetical example, but you have a team of engineers of different profiles, you have a product manager, you have a designer, and you keep growing that team with more people. And the wonderful thing is, as you keep growing, there's kind of, in this topology, there's a breaking point where the team becomes too big, and it kind of just organically separates into two new teams. And in each one of those teams, you still have people who have been around for a longer while, which gives you luxury of them being able to spread the culture and to promote this product development mindset. So at this point, I hope I persuaded you at least a little bit that empowered product teams are the way to build your software organization if you're going to build a great product. And I want you to remember what the recipe is. Again, it's simple. Excellent people, given enough context by the leadership, who are given freedom and responsibility, and they form teams that operate on data, and in order to understand the user better, and in order to find the right solution for their users. Thank you. I'll take your questions.
Thank you, Ivo. Are there any questions for Ivo? Again. Full of questions. Please wait for the microphone because of our streaming services.
Okay, me again. So the question would be, so if you're a leader who has a team that works like that, how do you evaluate their performance? Are you waiting for the results of the test? Or what's the model of making sure they're delivering what you want them to perform?
So need to be able to give them regular feedback. As you develop things, there's two parts. Like one is the speed of delivery. There you can make clear feedback whether there's blockers, you can unblock them, whether they can improve certain things. The second part is you need to let them test their hypothesis and wait on the results. Like you shouldn't judge and tell them this won't work because that's neither productive nor can you say that with certainty. Because they are the ones who have more context than someone who's not dealing with this data on a day-to-day basis. So let the team kind of come up with results and come back with results and figure out what, if things didn't pan out as expected, what was wrong. Like, did we do something wrong while implementing things, or are the users just not behaving in the way we expected? And I think the other part is even before they start implementing anything, that's also an important part of the leadership role, is you need to tell them whether they're first ambitious enough and whether the goals, the key results they're setting for themselves are actually going to make an impact. And you can assess whether there's feasibility, especially like if there's an inexperienced team, you will need to give them even more feedback and more frequent feedback, but over time they'll become very independent, and you're just going to be telling them do your thing when they come ask for some opinions or advice.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Beto from Entria. I have a question regarding actually deciding when you're building the team, how do you decide if you will employ new people or if you need a new module, new functionality really quickly? Do you maybe sometimes take agencies or third-party services, or do you always just employ and build in-house teams?
So we try to build in-house teams. Only in some crazy situations would we consider employing some external agency, because you really want to grow people along with your company, because it's not that you're trying to, like, we're in it for the long run. We're not here to just deliver some specific feature. We are here to build an organization that can scale over time. And I think the right way to do that is by building your in-house team and making sure that the people on those teams work well together and collaborate well together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ivo. We have no more time for questions. One big round of applause for Ivo.